Where do we begin with our story this evening? I suppose we should start right back to the 7th of January 1915, Monaghan, Ireland. That pivotal moment in the Elim movement. This is the moment where 7 young men from Ireland, Albert Kerr, George Allen, Frederick Farlow, Robert and John Mercer, William Henderson, R.E. Dara, and a young Welsh preacher, George Jeffreys, came together officially with the purpose of discussing the means of reaching Ireland with the full gospel on Pentecostal lines. The minutes of the meeting record, we believe it to be the mind of God that evangelist George Jeffreys of South Wales be invited to take up permanent evangelistic work in Ireland, and that centre be chosen by him for the purpose of establishing a church, out of which evangelists would be sent into this country towns and villages, and that a tent be hired for the purpose of holding gospel mission during the ministries. They had no formal training, but solely believed that God had placed a call upon them to reach Ireland. They were fervent in prayer between 1915 and 1917. When they had first met, George Jeffreys had sought God's guidance diligently. At first meeting concludes like this: it was agreed that God promises to supply the temporal needs of every evangelist who would be called into the work, and through prayer and faith in his promises, he would provide himself to be each one, Jehovah Jireh. The work took place, and by December 1915, a building had been secured in Hunter Street in Belfast to be used as a base for the work in north of Ireland. Elim Christ Church stood proud in what was one of the most run-down areas of Belfast, and while building was in much need of repair, that didn't affect the work. The minutes of December's meeting that many souls had been saved and accepted into membership, while lives and homes had been transformed. God was definitely on the move. By July 1916, the bands of workers had agreed to call themselves the Elim Evangelistic Band, and various missions were taking place in a tent which had been purchased for over £20 and would see many souls saved inside its drapes.
The work of Elim began in Lisburn in 1916 with a mission conducted by George Jeffreys in the local Orange Hall, which still stands today. Unfortunately, no details of this mission remain. However, the Lisburn Standard newspaper records an advert from the 9th of November 1917 announcing that evangelical meetings will be held each weeknight and Sundays once again in the local Orange Hall, and will be conducted by George Jeffreys and his evangelistic band. A week later, on the 16th of November 1918, a further advert is placed stating that the meetings had proved so successful that they were being continued for another week. It seemed that God was stirring up something in our town. By 1918, an advert in the Lisburn Standard newspaper on the 15th of March states that regular meetings of the Elim Mission would commence in the Temperance Hall, Lindenhall Street, each Sunday at 4 p.m, 8 p.m, and each Wednesday evening at 8 p.m. It is unclear who headed up the work in Lisburn in 1918. However, an article in the Elim Evangel on the 10th of December 1927 commends and thanks a George Bell for 9 years of service in Lisburn. This would place him in our congregation as far back as these meetings in 1918. By 1920, Lisburn was a busy industrial town, famous for its connection to the linen industry. The community was still reeling from World War I, in which almost 100 local men and women had lost their lives. For those who returned home, life was hard and job prospects were limited. Lisburn Urban District Council was responsible for the town's amenities and services, and just over 12,000 people lived within its boundaries. Law and order was upheld by the Royal Ulster Constabulary, with barracks on Railway Street, Smithfield and Hillhall.
The work in Lisburn is highlighted in the Elim Evangelical in 1920. This was the newsletter printed and distributed to keep all in the Elim family up to date on recent events. It is described as a small work which requires much earnest prayer. At this point, our fellowship is still without a pastor, but is shepherded by some of the young men from Belfast, of whom we believe George Bell to be one. A miraculous healing is reported. A sister who had been ill for 2 years with neuritis felt that she must obey the Lord in the matter of immersion, cost what it might. She was baptized at the Easter Convention in Belfast. Since then, the Lord has met her and healed her so that she is able to attend the meetings regularly. These miraculous healings were not unusual in the early days of Elim. God worked many wonders, and many people were healed of very serious diseases. These early pioneers were only concerned with the furtherance of the gospel. They were burning with the message of Jesus, bursting with the desire to share his good news with others. This desire drove them. Tent meetings, gospel meetings, conventions, the message of Christ consumed them. They worked fervently. They were frowned upon, as you can imagine. Organized religion looked down its nose. This was not how society believed Christianity functioned. It did not ripple with excitement, nor did it cross class systems. But these early Elim evangelists did not care for the rules. They lived solely under the governance of the King of Kings.
In the early years of what we now call Lisburn Elim, quite a few members of the evangelistic band passed through our congregation. Some had very short stays, while others lingered longer. Each, however, left their mark. The first noted is an Agnes Kennedy back in January 1921. Her stay was only 2 weeks, and from there we are unsure where she went next. However, she turns up in England in 1931, writing articles for the Evangel, so she appears to be quite a fundamental part of the movement.
Next to shepherd our congregation was Charles Je Kingston. He was born in 1898 in Fulham. You may wonder how a young Englishman at the age of 23 ends up in Ireland in 1921, when trouble was brewing. His father George, a butcher by trade, invited George Jeffreys to preach in Leighton-on-Sea, Essex in 1921, and the family became heavily involved in the work of Elim. Charles is noted as leading the Lisburn congregation in 1921, and at this point we believe them to still be meeting in the Templar Hall in Linden Hall Street. He is listed as an evangelist in the Evangel in December 1921. His time in Lisburn is short-lived, however. He appears to be instrumental in the early days of the Elim movement, alongside his father George.
July 1922 brings Robert Tweed to Lisburn. He is listed as an evangelist in the Evangel in 1920. He was born in 1903 to David and Margaret Tweed in Ballykelly. On the 1911 census, his father is noted as a farm labourer, and at 7, Robert is noted as illiterate. However, this does not seem to have stood in his way. At 19 years of age, he is in charge of the congregation in Lisburn. However, like most members of the band, his stay is short-lived. Robert goes on to become quite a key figure in the Elim movement, becoming the superintendent for Northern England and Scotland by 1929, and a member of the Executive Council in 1933.
1923 brings a young lady called Alice McKinley through our doors. Alice was born in Millfield, Armagh in 1902, which makes her 21 years old when placed in charge of the congregation in Lisburn. Alice joined the Elim Evangelistic Band very early on and is noted to have been quite a character. On 19th of May 1926, Alice marries a Robert Tweed, another member of the band who we mentioned a little earlier. Alice lived well into her 90s, and on a trip home from Canada in the 90s spoke in both Cullyback Elim and Lisburn Elim, staying in the manse with Pastor and Mrs. Atkinson.
In the very early days of Elim, members of the evangelistic band moved round churches quite frequently. They were moved on with little or no notice and sometimes didn't get a chance to say goodbye. The fellowship of Lisburn was very blessed. Although quite a few members of the band passed through our doors for short periods, one man remained a solid influence on the church for at least 9 years. George Bell was born in Belfast in 1895. His parents were originally from County Cavan, but moved just before George's birth. At this point in time, quite a few Protestant families moved north as trouble was on the horizon. The 1911 census lists his occupation at 15 years old as a shipping clerk and the family's home to be in the Shankill area. We believe him to be one of the two band members mentioned in the Evangel in 1920 as being key in the early setup of the Lisburn Church. He is also an elder in Belfast, which perhaps suggests that the work in Lisburn started small and without the need for full-time workers. He is described as a good and faithful servant and appears to have wholeheartedly committed himself to the flock who were meeting in the Temperance Hall. Lisburn Elim is noted to have started in 1921 when two members of the evangelistic band have settled in the town, and we believe George Bell to have been one of them. 1923 sees him marry Anna MacDonald Scott in Belfast, and the service is conducted by none other than George Jeffreys himself. In 1924, a piece of land is purchased in Wallace Avenue, and in early May of that same year, a small construction company dug the foundations and erected a basic structure. Money was tight, and Elim was not an affluent organisation, so the congregation pitched in to finish the building. The Evangel lists joinery, plastering, painting and decorating among the work carried out by the church members. They worked on Saturdays and very late into the night to get the building ready to open. Everyone who helped is described as very willing, and on the 21st of September 1924, the special opening services commenced. These were conducted by Pastor R. Mercer of Ballymena, and the Evangel write-up states,
When the assembly came together on that first Sunday morning, it was with great gladness of heart that they entered into the presence of the King of Kings, and wholeheartedly gave praise and thanks unto God, who had so significantly answered the prayers and desires of his people in giving them this beautiful building in which to worship him. They unitedly dedicated in prayer unto their bountiful giver. In every service the word of God went forth in power, and great blessing was enjoyed in each meeting. The services were exceptionally well attended and were continued until Friday night. It goes on to say, their purpose in prayer, with all who helped in any way, is that many souls shall weep their way to the cross, and that a full Foursquare gospel, bringing salvation to the sinner from the guilt and dominion of sin, the baptism in the Holy Ghost to believers, healing through the atonement to the sick, and the advent of our Lord Jesus Christ, shall ever be proclaimed from its platform, that the Bible standard of holiness unto the Lord shall ever be the watchword, song, and practice of all who are united with the work accomplished both within the walls, in the open-air services, and in the personal work in the highways and byways of Lisburn, and that from its centre shall radiate the blessed influence of a risen, exalted, and glorified Christ, who in Calvary's tree paid the full price of redemption of the whole man, spirit, soul, and body.
Not content to sit still and enjoy their new building, the congregation very quickly starts to reach out to the neighbouring community. 1925 sees outreach start in Colcavey in the form of a revival meeting held in the Orange Hall. The write-up in the Evangel states, members of the Lisburn Assembly, whom God has inspired with the desire to proclaim the full gospel in real scriptural order. These young people are on fire for God, and we pray that there may be everlasting blessing in the salvation of many lost souls through their ministry. Community outreach has been at the heart of the Lisburn Elim since the very early days. We have never been a church content to sit on the sidelines. From those very early days right up to today, we have had a mission to reach out to our city, a yearning for those lost to see them made whole through the Father's love.
To belong to an Elim church in those early days was to belong to a family. This was not an idle family, though. People of Elim were busy. There was a real purpose and urgency in the need to reach the lost with the gospel, to see souls saved, bodies healed, and lives transformed. Conventions were held twice yearly and as many as possible attended. This was a chance to seek God and to catch up with other Elim brethren. The convention started right back in 1916, with the first recorded to have taken place on Easter Monday in Kingan Hall on Botanic Avenue. Now, Easter Monday 1916 is best known with the island of Ireland. However, politics did not interest those early pioneers. Jeffreys and his band were merely concerned with the business of salvation. They did not belong to denominations or country, but instead their citizenship lay in the kingdom of God. The Christmas Convention was traditionally held in Belfast and started on Christmas Day. There would have been 4 services, including a baptism service and no time to pull a cracker or eat a turkey or ham dinner. This would have continued on Boxing Day too. The summer convention usually started on 12th of July and was held in Bangor. These meetings were packed with people simply hungry for the word. A baptism service was also held at the Easter Convention, and people simply walked to the seafront where Principal Jeffreys would baptise large crowds at a time. I wonder what these scenes may have looked like to those outside of the Elim movement, as people walked down to the seafront of Bangor and a Welshman dunked them under the water. I'm sure they drew some looks from passer-bys. These conventions were not only well attended, but are noted in the Evangel as being packed with the rafters. People came from Armagh, Ballymena, Lurgan, Monaghan, and of course, our own town of Lisburn.
1925 brought a change of name to Elim, and we became the Elim Foursquare Gospel Church. A trip across the Atlantic in 1924 to the Los Angeles to visit Amy McPherson's Angelus Temple had inspired Jeffreys when he saw Foursquare used in the name of her church. 1926 brought another change of name, this time to the Foursquare Gospel Alliance, which to this day remains the legal name of Elim Pentecostal Church. This name summed up the fundamental doctrines that proclaimed Jesus Christ as Saviour, Healer, Baptizer, and Coming King. These beliefs remain at our core today, 95 years later, and are boldly proclaimed on the front windows of our church.
The Foursquare Gospel. Foursquare, blessed word, inspired word. Like every other Bible word, it is God-breathed. It is found back in the Old Testament, where the altar of burnt offering and the altar of incense are both declared to be foursquare. The former, a type of Calvary, was situated inside the gate of the open courtyard which surrounded the tabernacle. The latter was placed before the veil right in the holy place, and it speaks of the adoration, praise and worship which should continually ascend to God from the heart of the believer. In the New Testament we have a glimpse of the home of the redeemed, a city which lieth foursquare.
February 1925 brought a visit from the principal himself to Lisburn. The Evangel notes that Pastor Jeffreys conducted an ordination service of elders for what is described as the growing assembly. He preached in Wallace Avenue on the 8th of February and then went out to visit Kilcavey Mission, which George Bell and members of the church had been running. The Evangel describes the work as declaring uncompromisingly the whole counsel of God, and they found the place to be packed to the doors.
Unfortunately, church life doesn't always run smoothly, and on the 10th of March 1925, our church suffers a break-in. The Lisburn Standard records a David Linus being charged with entering the Elim Hall and stealing 2 bottles of communion wine. I'm unsure what the sentencing for this might have been at the time. However, I am confident that many prayers may have been uttered for his soul in our congregation.
Everyone loves a good wedding, and the first to take place in Lisburn Elim is on the 15th of September 1925, and Mr. John Graham marries Miss Effie Fox, and the ceremony is conducted by Pastor Robert Tweed. There have been many more weddings and ceremonies conducted during the last 100 years in our church, some in Wallace Avenue and some here on the Belfast roadside. Lisburn Elim has always believed that marriage is a gift from God and should be celebrated in front of the great gift giver. Perhaps you were married here or have attended weddings here and have witnessed couples declare their love for each other in front of the congregation and in front of God. Perhaps you have served at weddings here or stood outside ready to throw confetti over the beaming couple.
In 1929, our church inducts its first pastor. That is not to diminish the work of all those who had gone before, but to show how the Elim Foursquare Gospel Alliance was growing and more young men were training as pastors. Pastor McAvoy served from June 1929 to May 1930. It is unclear whether George Bell remained in Lisburn after 1929, or whether he returned from his home church in Belfast. An article in the Evangel in January 1930 states, "Rejoice to be able to report that the Lord's work in this part of the vineyard is making steady progress under the ministry of Pastor McAvoy." In 1930, under Pastor McAvoy's guidance, a children's work was also formed, and it is noted that it is very encouraging to see the interest these little ones take in the things of God. Jean Chambers was among the first 8 members of this original Sunday school, and in 1931, Nessie Champion becomes her Sunday school teacher. This work would mark the start of 91 years of children's outreach in Lisburn Elim through Sunday school and other organisations such as the Campaigners, Youth Club, Stepping Stones, Yacht Club and Kids Zone, to name only a few. For 91 years there has been a burning desire to encourage faith when little many of you sit here tonight because of the faithfulness of a Sunday school teacher or children's worker. Many of us can still recount the memory verses we learnt on a Sunday school pew and call them to memory when comfort is required.
So, Judith and Nicola.
Hi.
Oh, wow. Tell us how you came to the church here and what age you were.
Go ahead first, Nicola. I'll go first, because have you seen what she's got written down here?
I've seen her notes.
We're going to be here all night.
My notes.
Her notes. No, we were 8 years old when we first came to Lisburn Elim. We moved from Craigavon to Lisburn. We were brought up free Presbyterian from we were 2, and Mum wanted to get us into a church, and so we seen Lisburn Elim. Mum always liked Lisburn Elim and brought us up. First day I walked into Lisburn Elim Sunday school, was wearing a hat, because free Presbyterian you have to wear a hat. Not knocking it, so okay. But walked into Sunday school, Sunday best, Sunday hat on. Last time I ever wore that Sunday hat. Never again. To be honest with you, I think she just sent us to Sunday school just to get us out of the house, to be fair. But basically mine is exactly pretty much like Nikki's. We came when we were 8. I remember Lorraine being our first Sunday school teacher here, and Jim Atkinson being our Sunday school superintendent at the time, and yeah, pretty much the same as Nikki, that one.
Seeing as your twins.
Yeah, same we're twins. We came at the same time.
Yeah.
I think my mum just wanted to get church close so that we could, honestly.
Okay, so how do you think your faith, obviously, and the church here in Lisburn have helped you through your life?
I'll let you talk first.
Big notes.
She only wants to do that so she can steal all my notes. It's all right. No, I'm only joking. I'm only joking. Actually, I was thinking about it today when I was doing, our kids are doing exams, and I was thinking about how much the church has really helped us. Actually, I was thinking Lisburn Elim actually has been like a second family to me, and I know to Nicola too. We came from a one-parent family, as some of the older ones that were here would know, and a lot of people when we came, stepped up and actually helped and encouraged our wee family, and helped us out in times of trouble and things. And I remember what impacted me the most was Sunday school. I remember given the opportunity and to sing, and I remember Jim, I remember your wee voice going, and now we have the twins come to Sunday school.
We still have that
Judith
tape at
and
home.
the
wee tape
Nicola
that you actually
Garner.
put into a tape machine? We still have
Yeah,
that.
the Kettle on the Thousand Hills. We can't sing now at all.
But, I thought we were going to get a rendition.
No, definitely not. We'll not put you through that tonight. And I remember like Elizabeth Moody and her wee
stories, dressing up in Bible class and dressing up like her wee Elizabeth. And she had another wee lady she used to do all the time too. And youth, and I remember our youth, like Alison and the girls would know, like we had the most amazing youth leaders, PJ and Hillary, and we went everywhere together, and we all became like a really close family, and our faith got stronger. We got Jeffrey and Shirley started our first mime group and stuff, and I remember all of us along the stage singing, "One thing I know." Come on, Alison. Everybody's got to see the sun. Right? So, and we're taking heaven by storm, you know. So God really encouraged us through that, and our faith got really strong through it. And Lisburn Elim itself is very much a family. We have still really, really close friends that are lifetime friends, that we've been through thick and thin, through happy times and sad times. Whenever we need each other, we're always just at the end of phone or text message, no matter what. It's your turn.
Jeff and I were arguing, or sitting down there going, how long have we actually been in? And I had sat there and I was thinking, I know that one. I'm saying that. We have been in this church for 37 years.
Wow.
37 years. And
those poor people. Like.
In Lisburn Elim. And Lisburn to me, it's like pretty much what Judah said. Everybody's just been such a great family. And growing up in our youth, at the time, obviously we have our own wee youth group now and stuff, but growing up in our youth group, we were always like a family. It was always something really exciting to do, like our weekends. Tom's house on a Sunday after church, Sunday night, straight in. The time when you were allowed to pack 5 or 6 people in a car, that was us going up to Tom's house.
I actually think we got about 10 in a car, actually. 10,
brilliant.
Probably.
And the time Debbie Robinson and the pink spot game, first time.
Our
new youth leader, might I add, Debbie Robinson.
We're sorry, Debbie.
Yeah, we did feel bad about our new one, like after the weekend was
went
over.
away. She was just coming for us first weekend away, and she let us borrow her lipstick to play this pink lipstick game. Well, we broke it and put it back without saying anything. And then we had another youth leader called Louise that sort of made us all feel really guilty for not saying anything, because obviously when she lifted it up.
Together
so we all put our money together and got our new one. Dusty Rose or something it was called. But we're
sorry, Debbie. We're still sorry all those years later.
Honestly, we had the best, and our faith was so good because we had this thing called the Barney program or something it was called, the Barneys. And we all had, every week we had to pick like a name out of the hat, and every week we had to encourage that one person. Whether it was to send them a wee postcard, you know, we don't really do that nowadays, it's normally a wee text, but a wee postcard, or send them a wee gift or a wee letter or something, and just to encourage us through that week to get through to the weekend. And that really helped me sometimes, especially when you were feeling like down or something you were struggling with. That wee letter or that wee bits and pieces always came at a time when you needed it the most. So the church has just been really amazing for us.
Okay, so you girls have worked in Stepping Stones, Kids Zone, Sunday School, creche, youth clubs, every organisation we have ever probably run out of here since you've been old enough to help out. How valuable do you believe that children's work that started 91 years ago, how valuable do you believe that is?
I think it's really valuable. I always say to the ones that I have seen kids that have came through our Kids Zone grow up into young adults and careers. And I keep saying, I'm not old. I actually started really young. You know, looking after the kids.
We actually just started.
Because I'm not kidding you. Like we're looking after kids that their mummies used to come when they were little. And I keep going, it's all right, I started young. It's not that I'm really old. But I think it's really valuable, or valuable, because today's society for kids is just so different. There's a lot of things going on now in society that kids are just so confused, like working within a school and just young people and what they have to face. And I believe if we start teaching our children younger and telling them about the love of God and, you know, to have faith in Him, that they realise that, you know, God is there to help them make the decisions that they need in life, that it's really important to do it now, because if you don't do it now, later on, they're going to go into their high schools or their schools and they're going to listen to other people. And then it's going to be harder for you to sort of say, you know, no, don't listen to that, but because their friends are all doing them, you know. So I do think it's very important to do children's work.
I'm the same.
I actually think if we didn't have children in the church, then we wouldn't have youth in the church. And if we didn't have youth in the church, we basically wouldn't have a congregation. Yes, we do have the older generation, but in all fairness, not all of us are going to live like the next. We need we need to implant God's love and grace into their hearts at a young age so that they can come up and take over from us, so that we can all sit at the back and listen to the next generation of kids and youth on the stage at prize givings, at Christmas plays, whatever we do with the kids. And, you know, I know for a fact that if it wasn't for my Sunday school teachers and our youth leaders, I actually want to be like them. I want to be like our youth leaders and our teachers, to instill the love of God into those kids, that one day they'll come back and they'll think, if they go out into the world, like I was reading that Alan Graham, started reading that Alan Graham book. We had a wee missionary come to our church a couple of weeks ago, and I'm telling you, really touched my heart. My next journey is to Africa, by the way. I just thrown it out there. But
we'll pray over that for you.
Yeah, please do. I actually think, I was reading just a wee bit of his, and he was going through a lot at the beginning of his life, into drinking and alcohol. And I just remember he was saying that when he was young, it was his Sunday school teacher, whenever he was feeling down, he actually bumped into his Sunday school's granddaughter, or Sunday school teacher's granddaughter, before he had got saved. And then he remembered all the things, and I want to be like that. Jim was actually talking to me as he came in tonight. He was saying about one of his ones, you know, had sent him a really lovely, and I want to be like, I want those kids to remember something that God has instilled in me to tell them, you know, in the generations to come, like if they do go into the world, and that they'll know that God loves them and come back to where they're home and where they belong.
Yeah. And the work never stops. If anybody hears the music, that's just youth.
Yeah.
They're downstairs and they're doing their thing. It doesn't stop. It just continues. So lastly, you've both met your husbands here. I remember you meeting Mark in youth club and not liking him so much at the start, can I say? And now obviously your children attend here, and you have generational salvation here. Tell us just a wee tiny bit of your story.
Alison's very much right. I could not stand the sight of Mark. Actually, to be fair, none of us did. We couldn't stand him. He came and he was so bad. He had rather hit people with uni-hawk sticks than actually play uni-hawk. And I remember Louise, he took the thumbnail of one of the leaders, Louise, took her husband, I think it was. But whenever you say people where God gets saved, you know, when you get saved by God, you know, sometimes you can't see change in people. And I was very much like, anyone that I fancied loved Nicola. So I had no hope on this earth that I was going to get a husband. I didn't even think I was going to get married at all. So when Mark actually got saved, like, God really changed his life from the inside out. Like, and I mean, completely different man. You know, I remember actually the day he got saved, and I was sitting behind him, and he was sitting here at a youth meeting, and he actually went out in the Lord, in the Spirit, onto the floor, just dropped. And I remember looking, going, oh my word, what's happening? But see, when he got up, he was completely changed. I mean, never touched drugs, never touched drink or anything again. But God actually, it was actually Mark that chased after me.
Would Mark tell a different story, do you think?
No. I don't think so. As I say, I didn't think I was ever. He did change, and obviously we all grew to really love him. And he actually asked me out one night after Bible study. Me and Mark both got really involved in church, by meetings, Bible study on Monday or Wednesdays, prayer meeting Mondays, youth, Sunday school, whatever. And he asked me out one Wednesday night. He asked to walk me home, and he asked me out the wee bus stop down there. It's not even a bus stop anymore, but down there on the road. And God has really blessed and encouraged our wee family, and we've been through rough times and stuff. When PJ and Hillary have been incredible and amazing and stuff. And I just think, by God's grace, we're together. And now that we have our three amazing boys, Joel, Luke, and Billy, you know, God had a life. I actually thought I was going to the mission fields. Like, that was my life. Debbie had been to Africa, and I thought I was going to the mission fields, but God had other plans, and we have had the 2 boys and Billy, and wouldn't change them for the world. And I do praise God that they are involved, and it's great to see them involved in, you know, and in the ministries of church. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, and long may it last.
I was sitting thinking about this story. And I was thinking, right, okay, what am I going to say? I could tell you the very first time I seen Daryl for the very first time. The youth used to be really cool. You know, we all used to sit up in our rows along the back. Wasn't our place? Yeah. Along the back rows, like all the back rows and thing. And I remember there was something on at church, and obviously Joyce and David must have brought Daryl to church. And all I remember is sitting at the back row, and the next thing, this tall, good-looking fella walked into the church. And everybody, all the girls going, look, wondering who, you know, obviously not even knowing who he was. And when he left, we didn't know who he was. We just thought, he's dishy.
It wasn't for want of trying. I
Yes,
don't think that no one knew who he was. Sorry to embarrass you, Daryl.
There's probably a lot of notes being passed at that back row too. Who is he?
Don't tell our secrets. Yeah, and we were taking notes because of what the pastor was saying, by the way. Not that we're writing about anything else, okay? No, Daryl started just coming to our singles and young marrieds, I think. It's not really bad that I can't really actually remember. Sorry. I do remember, though, when he asked me out. We singles and young marrieds were all going to Wallace Park, and I was sitting on the swing, we were swinging back and forth, and we were just chatting away. And his mum and dad were away with Lindsay in London, and he said to me, do you want to go out and Tuesday night? Well, I was so excited. I was like, yeah, we'll go for something. So, of course, I went into work on Monday and was telling all the girls about this good-looking fella asking me out. Needless to say, the next day we went on our date. The next day after that, I went back into work and told them that we're now going out and we're dating. So it was all exciting. And then pretty much from there, we got married, had 3 beautiful kids. He's over there. Well, Elliot's over there with his earphones. 2 kids are downstairs. Just really want Faith and Anna and Elliot to grow up in the church. Like I said, with the youth and school and the way of the world, it's all just so scary at the moment, the way people are thinking. I just want Faith and Anna to know that God really loves them. When I see Joel and Luke and Billy and how well they've grown up in the Lord, I would love Elliot to be like that too, and just grow up and just show the love of God. But that's where we all come in, all of us come in, when we need to teach our children that way. And that's
There's a great big church here praying for your families constantly. Thank you so much, girls. Okay. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
June 1930 sees a pastor, J. Hill, take up leadership of the congregation. An article in the Elim Evangel describes his ministry as spirit-filled, and the people of Lisburn as much prejudiced against the truths we stand for. He is also noted for having spoken at afternoon sessions of the Summer Convention in Bangor in 1930. March 1931 sees Pastor Hill move to Armagh, and evangelist David Rudkin stepped from Armagh into the role in Lisburn. Shortly afterwards, the Evangel reports a visit of the Lisburn Crusaders to Armagh Elim. The Crusaders were the youth department of Elim, aged between 14 and 35. Nessie Chapman, who many here tonight will remember with fondness, was introduced to our assembly by a friend who invited her to attend the Crusaders. She was a teenager at the time and went on to commit her life to Christ and give him many years of faithful service before he called her home to glory. The write-up of the night states, "Their messages in word and song will long be remembered, and the hundreds that were gathered together were greatly blessed, as these young people told of the Saviour they had found and the satisfaction he gives." November 1931 sees a time of renewed consecration in Lisburn. The Evangel states, "God's children have been led into a closer walk and a sweeter fellowship with the Lord." The summer of 1932 brings Pastor Eric Dainton to our doors, and he stays for a period of 2 years. The longest serving member of our congregation, Mrs. Chambers, has many memories from those early days. Her uncle Dan was the caretaker in those days, and as a child she remembers a coal fire in the centre of the church which was used to heat the building.
I remember Pastor James McAvoy. That wasn't yesterday. We were in, my uncle was the caretaker, and he had to be there at that 8:30 on a Sunday. It was a big round stove in it. There was no heating, and he had to go. And my father went and helped him, and there was a man, John North. So the three of them went round and got the stove all going before they went back home again.
September 1936 brought the 21st anniversary of the Elim Foursquare Gospel Alliance. This was billed as Elim's coming of age. Major events were held all over Britain, with the largest in Crystal Palace in London. These were huge celebrations of all that God had done and was continuing to do. Much like the conventions, there were baptisms, and later that year the Crystal Palace tragically burned down, and people joked that it was the Pentecostals along with George Jeffreys calling for the fire to fall.
Northern Ireland held its own coming-of-age event in the King's Hall in 1936. It was significant as it was not only the organisation's 21st birthday, but it was the first time the King's Hall had been used for a religious event. This was hugely supported by the local Elim churches, with Belfast City Council laying on extra buses and trams for the folk wanting to attend. It was estimated that on the last night, some 10,000 people attended. There were 750 professions of faith recorded during the 3-week event. George Jeffreys preached at this event. However, in the last night, he had to preach from a boxing ring that had been set up for a fight the next night. Perhaps this was symbolic of what was to come, as only a few years later, in 1939, the principal parted ways with the organisation he had established.
Life in Lisburn in the late 1930s was difficult. The World Economic Depression had hit trade industry hard, and many men and women in the town were unemployed or on reduced earnings. Lisburn, with its farms, mills and factories, was hugely dependent on the linen industry, which relied heavily on the export market. The town had a little lift in July 1937 during the visit of King George IV and Queen Elizabeth. The royal couple toured Market Square among other places in the town. However, the outbreak of war in 1939 was to make things a little bleaker still. 18,000 men and women across Northern Ireland enlisted for various services, and many more were required to stay at home and serve industry. In the early years of the war, the 4th Battalion Royal Welsh Fusiliers were stationed in Lisburn, and a number of airfields were established in the wider Lisburn area. Local defence volunteers nicknamed Dad's Army started, and by August 1940, 26,000 men in Northern Ireland had volunteered. Lisburn Urban District Council were one of the first local councils to develop their own air raid precaution scheme. The various civil defence organisations in Lisburn became their own during the Belfast Blitz in 1941, when thousands were forced to flee the city. Evacuees flooded into Lisburn.
Despite the ongoing war, the work of Elim continued on as best as it could. An article in the Evangel in September 1939 suggested that Elim churches bring the time of their services forward to an earlier hour to allow the congregation to get home before the blackout, and those as wardens to take up their evening posts. It was noted that several churches had started afternoon meetings as well. One particular article of interest describes how one Elim church did not hear the air raid warning while its service was in progress. It describes how their lusty singing drowned out the wail of the siren, and the congregation were blissfully ignorant of the warning. In light of this, it was advised that an usher be posted outside the front door of the church during the singing of congregational hymns. If the air raid was to sound, those with duties were to leave immediately to get to their posts. Those left were to be gathered into the safest position and the meeting resumed, probably in a season of prayer.
For the ministers who served through these war years and the years after that, times must have been tough. Pastor James Hardman, Pastor Edward Steele, Pastor James Mulvey, Pastor Alex Johnson and Pastor Eric Fulton. Although in the midst of a war, the message did not dull. It had the same spark and was preached with the same intensity as it had always been. 1938 saw a return of George Bell, this time as Pastor Bell, and the series of revival missions held. He is not listed on the official list of pastors for our church, so may have been there on special speaking engagements. And one of these meetings sees a special visit by Pastor Je Kingston, who had served back in 1921. In 1943, the Lisburn Standard posted a brief outline of beliefs of the Elim Church in Lisburn. It read, "They believe that all men need to be saved from the guilt and penalty of sin. They feel that man's only hope of salvation is in Jesus Christ the Saviour. They believe that the sick can be healed in answer to prayer, according to James 5:14. They believe that the Lord Jesus Christ desires to fill the saints with Holy Ghost power, thus enabling them to preach the word with boldness. They also firmly believe in the second coming of Christ. He himself said, 'And if I go, I will come again.' John chapter 14, verse 3. When Christ comes, they believe he will take all the born-again believers to be with himself. This shows the total of uncompromising beliefs held since the establishment of Elim and Lisburn, still held true despite the hardships that had been faced in the difficult years of war. The message had not changed. It was and still is simply Jesus Christ, Saviour, Healer, Baptizer, and coming King. A convention was also held in Lisburn in 1943, and Lisburn Baptist Church was borrowed to hold a baptism service. Despite the lack of hope in these dark days, the church was pressing forward. The word rang out from Wallace Avenue, just as it did from the church in Thessalonica in the book of Acts.
The 1950s began with austerity and ended with affluence. Rock and roll was born, teddy boys were in fashion, the Morris Minor was the most popular car, and the Open was played in Portrush for the first time. The establishment of the welfare state and NHS meant no one needed to fear absolute poverty ever again. So many things changed in people's lives in the 50s, but if one thing stands out as defining the age more than any other, it is the coming of television. At the beginning of the decade, television was a luxury item, but after a permanent transmitter was established on Divis Mountain in 1954, it became more accessible to the people of Northern Ireland. In his book, Elim in Ireland, 1915 to 1985, Pastor Stephen Hilliard explains that a common theme of the Elim preaching in the 1950s was separation from the world. Congregations were told that they were in the world, but not of it. They were now through saving grace. The Lord's people and the beggarly elements of the world should have no more hold on them. He writes, in the 1950s, Elim people who installed televisions in their homes found it hard to hide their flirtation with the world, as reception required large rooftop aerials, prompting some preachers to ask, "Can the devil's horns be seen on your roof?" Perhaps the biggest and most exciting event of the decade for Elim was the publication of the Redemptional Hymnal in 1951. It was published by Elim Publishing Company as a joint venture with the Assemblies of God and the Apostolic Church. It served Elim well for many, many years, and I'm sure many here tonight can remember the number or page of their favourite hymn.
Pastor Eric Fulton was in charge of the book in Lisburn from 1948 to 1956. A report on the annual meeting in March 1951, and Mr. W.J. Irvine paid tribute to Pastor Fulton not only in the work he had done in the church but in Lisburn as well. He comments on his faithfulness in carrying out his duties as a minister of the gospel. An advertisement in the Lisburn Herald in 1951 invites all to a children's night in the church, which would include the annual prize distribution, and at this point Miss M. Snowdene was overseeing the children's work. 1953 sees a missionary rally with Pastor and Mrs. Jessie Williams from Southern Rhodesia, as it was then, which is again advertised for all to come. The The annual Sunday school excursion takes place in August of the same year, with everyone getting the train to Bangor. Tickets were 1D for adults and 2D for children. Another decade comes to close with the uncompromising truth of the gospel being the watchword of Lisburn Elim.
After Pastor Fulton, no pastors listed in Lisburn Elim again until Pastor Jim Kay in 1959. We are unsure who led the congregation at this point. Perhaps the elders and deacons stepped in until the position was filled. Pastor Kay stays for a period of 2 years, after which a Pastor Clyde Thomas serves for a year. Pastor Stanley Shaw takes over the reins in 1963 and guides the church up until 1967. The 1960s saw the miniskirt come into fashion. The Beatles emerged from Liverpool, and unfortunately the Troubles, as it became known, starting in Northern Ireland in 1969, saw Operation Banner, which British troops brought into our wee corner of the world, where they would stay for more than 3 decades. However, despite all of these changes and difficulties, the church moved forward with the message unchanged. 1966 have brought a new family to the church, the Smiths.
So we've moved into the 1960s, 1966 in particular, and I now have the joy of speaking to Bob and Ruth for a few minutes. So 1966 was a big World Cup year, but it was a big year for your family, Ruth, you understand, in that your dad had a new job and moved from Moneyslane to Lisburn, and that's when you came to the church. Can you tell us a bit about what the church was like in those days?
Well, whenever we came in 1966, actually it was in around the 27th or 29th of November, so it's nearly exactly the dates that we came. And when we came to Lisburn Elim, we'd come from Moneyslane, and we lived about 4 miles from Moneyslane, roughly 3 to 4 miles from Moneyslane, but we went there. We loved it there, but when Dad moved to Hillsborough to work, then we came to Lisburn Elim, so we've been here since then. But Lisburn Elim then was quite an old building compared to Moneyslane, because Moneyslane, although it was a small church, it was also quite a new church built. And we had all these forms in Lisburn Elim, as you seen on earlier photos. And the heating in it was pipes along the wall, and we sat near the back. My family sat near the back as well. And in the winter time, it was so cold, you could put your feet on these heaters, these pipes, and get them warm, and it was great for that. Mostly, I would have known more of the older families in the church than the young people, because I was involved in an outreach and another fellowship. And so I would have known the Chambers, the Kerrs, the McGarrys, all big families sitting right in front of us on a Sunday morning. And Mrs. Armstrong was the pianist then, and I don't know, but she was fantastic on that piano. She literally made it live. And Florence Dury was the other organist. So we enjoyed the fellowship, and it was great to be in a fellowship again into a Pentecostal church. And I'd also lived for a while in Portadown, by the way, and because my work I couldn't travel to my work, so from Sunday nights to Friday nights, I lived in Portadown, and I went to Portadown Elim. So I came literally from Moneyslane and Portadown Elim to Lisburn Elim.
We're very glad you did. Can you tell us a wee bit, Ruth, about how you came to faith, and personal faith?
Right. My mum and dad actually ran a mission hall called Rings End Mission Hall. And so we went to Moneyslane Elim in the morning. We went to the Rings End Mission Hall on a Sunday night. And when I was quite young, actually, I'd been brought up, as I say, in a Christian home. And some of my uncles were brethren, and they rammed the gospel home to us, to say the least of it, to my brother and I, more so than Paul and I. And so we went to the mission hall, and in that mission hall I accepted Jesus as my Saviour when I was quite young. But I was wondering, and I was always doubting if I was really saved or not. And so then one day I was reading a book by D.L. Moody, and in it he had a dream about a soul who had put off salvation. And had put off salvation for so long. And in the dream, the soul had met up with the devil, or the devil had met up with him, and he was hiding. And he was hiding in an unlit fire. And the devil said to him, I've got you now. You've listened to me. You've put off salvation. And that's you. You're mine now. And that scared the living daylights out of me, type of thing. So I asked the Lord to into my heart again. And from then on, I tried to live for the Lord. And like Judith, I wanted to be a missionary. That was my aim in life, to be a missionary. Never achieved it, but that was it.
Well, you didn't achieve that because God had other plans here for you with what you've been involved in here. And Bob, beside you tonight. Bob, can you tell us how you came to the church, what year you came and how you came to the church?
Well, I came to the church in 1969. And I was in the forces, and I came over here in 1969, and I wanted to find out where the Elim church was. And somebody said, oh, it's in Wallace Avenue. So, near the Orange Hall. So the first church I went to was actually the Brethren, which is just down the road from the Elim church. And I said to the man at the door, I says, excuse me, where's the Elim church, the Pentecostal church? He says, it's about 50 yards down that way. So,
did you leave, Bob? Did you walk the other direction?
So I never went back to the Brethren after that. I joined the Elim church anyway. And it was funny, the first time I went to the Elim church, like you've seen on the pictures there, they had the old benches. And what had happened, they had just varnished the benches. And I had ran from the camp, and I was sweating the time we got to the Elim church. And I took off my jacket, and I sat down, and I put my back against the seat, and I couldn't get up. I was actually stuck to the seat, and Ruth was behind me with her mum. I don't know if your dad was there. She said, that man's stuck to the seat.
Well, Bob, that leads me beautifully on to the next part. There's a love story there. There's a love story, and you must have caught Ruth's eye when you sat in that seat in front of her.
After the meeting, she said, I'm going to a young people's meeting now. And I said, can I come with you? So I went with them, you know. And Paul, another good story, Paul and Ruth was just sitting in the car, and I said, can you stop for some fish and chips? And so we stopped where the old market was, you know, and I went in and got some fish and chips. And in the meantime, they were in the car, and she says, I think he's going to get some fish and chips. And I took the fish and chips up to the camp and take them out with me.
No way!
And they got nothing. And she said to me later when we got married, she said, I should have known better, you know.
Bob, you're a lucky man that you got another date after that, I'm telling you. So can you tell me that obviously you got married. What year did you get married in?
I got married in 70, December 70, yeah. I tried to get it out. We had a Mr. and Mrs. once, you know, and they got the year all mixed up, didn't they? And she kept on saying it wasn't that date at all.
I could have gotten you into trouble tonight there. So can you tell us a bit, obviously you married and then you've had your children and you've settled in the church.
Yes, well, we had 3 children, you know. There was Mark and Sharon, and our youngest one was Stephen. And Stephen loved the church, you know. He was, and he always went to the open airs with us in the town. And unfortunately, Stephen got knocked down and killed. On the road in the Belsize, we were going up to the army camp. No, sorry, I was coming out of the army camp because it was shut at 6 o'clock. Unfortunately, Stephen ran ahead of us and he ran in front of the car and he was taken from us. But God has been very, very good to us over the years. Because we've honoured God in everything we do, we try to do. God has multiplied our blessings. So God is no man's debtor. I'd like to say that. And even though we lost Stephen, Stephen's gone to be with the Lord. Because Stephen loves the Lord. He loves Sunday school work. And Jim Atkinson, which is here. Good to see Jim. And Jim would know Stephen well. And Jim and his guitar. We had a great time in the Sunday school. And no matter where we went, even in the forces, if they didn't have a Sunday school, we always started one off. So Sunday school work is very, very important. So if any young people here, never give up, because you're the future in this church.
That's so true, so true. And you are an inspiration just with how you depend on God and carry on every day. Yeah. Just a final question for both of you. How has your faith and the church helped you over the years?
It's been great to realise that God... It's been... Sorry. It's been great that we've to realise that God has been our friend, faithful in every situation, and he's always there and he's always with us. And we're so conscious of that and so conscious of his blessings. He's blessed us abundantly. And the church has been behind us and helped us in all these situations, in the tragedy of Stephen and also in the fire that we had where we lost most of our possessions. God was with us. Nobody was hurt. Our house was destroyed, but nobody was hurt. And the church rallied around, and we thank everyone of the church and of the members because they've all been there for us and blessed us as well. We thank them for their fellowship.
I'm sure there's so many would say that you've been there for them too, Ruth and Bob. Bob, do you have anything else you want to say before we finish?
Yes, well, I think, she's covered most of it, what we'd like to say, but we have actually loved the fellowship of the people, God's people here. And like Ruth said about the fire and everything, they rallied around us in everything we do. God give us another house, which is better, because those who honour him, he has honoured, And I thank God for all the blessings which he's done, And we always say that God is just one prayer away. And we love God's people and we love God's house of prayer, the prayer meeting. That's why we love this church, because the prayer of the people of God, And though we went through tragedy, God's been always with us, And he's always blessed everything that we do. God has actually blessed us, So there's a song we used to sing, I'm richer than a millionaire, just because he cares. And that is so true in our lives, So it doesn't matter much money you give or anything you do for God, God will multiply it, We don't seek wealth or anything like that, because, like I said, we're rich in God, and that is the main thing, to give God all the honour which is due unto his mighty name.
Thank you for a beautiful testimony of God's faithfulness. Bob and Ruth.
In the 1970s, while the rest of Britain was struggling to get to grips with decriminalisation, tuning in to news of the Watergate scandal, watching Jaws in the cinema and riding their chopper bikes, Northern Ireland was in the midst of a civil war. These were not easy days to live through. Security checkpoints, no-go areas, bag searches, bomb threats, army patrols and civilian unrest. Thankfully, the Church has never claimed political affiliation, the kingdom of heaven being the only true goal. During these dark days of the Troubles, the Church provided an alternative to the ongoing culture of hate. They simply worked tirelessly to point people to the Father. The message was the same. All have sinned, but redemption is possible. Lisburn Elim had an extensive renovation in 1970, and the grand reopening was Saturday, the 28th November 1970. Ruth and Bob's was the first wedding to take place in the newly refurbished church, and Ruth recalls Billy Silcox promising her that the church would be ready in time for their wedding. This refurbishment included a small extension to house new toilets. Pastor Sandy Wilson was then Irish superintendent, presided at the grand reopening, and the keys were given to a Mrs. Hamilton, who at the time was the longest serving member of the church of officially opening the doors.
1971 saw Pastor Billy McCandless inducted into Lisburn Elim, and he served up until 1980. Pastor McCandless is noted as being an exceptional Bible teacher, with his Bible studies being well attended. One particular series on the Second Coming is noted to have drawn crowds. Even people from other churches attended. During his pastorship, a mission was held with a visiting speaker, Jeff Feasey. This mission was very well attended and quite a number were saved at these meetings. Ruby Doherty was one of these. A written testimony from herself reads, "God makes no mistakes. God is so good, so loving, so kind. He has a lovely way of coming right into our lives." At the first night of the mission, after listening to the gospel of our lovely Lord and Saviour, they made an appeal. Tommy's hand went up first. He then touched me to put up my hand and praise God. We gave our lives over to Jesus. God wrote our names down together in the Lamb's Book of Life. I remember all the congregation standing up and singing, "Amazing Grace."
A church newsletter from 1978 advertises the monthly get-together, and Pastor McCandless writes, "It is a basic individual need to be loved and to love. I wonder, even amidst the fellowship of God's children, do you sometimes feel lonely? At times, we don't seem to care or take time to understand one another. Yet, young and old alike, as individuals of Christ's body, we need one another. Wise words to help us remember that we are all part of a perfectly imperfect family of sinners saved by grace, working towards the common goal of furthering the kingdom. Fellowship is so important, and although the mission set by Christ himself is to get out and reach the lost, we are also responsible for each other. We are to provide comfort and support when others in the fellowship are in need. We are to rejoice alongside others when good news is received. We are to lift each other up in prayer and work wholeheartedly together. Pastor continues, by drawing near to God and seeking to be filled with his Spirit, let us look at one another not through our own eyes, but through the eyes of Jesus.
In former Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, Elim missionaries had established a missions base against the backdrop of civil war. By June 1978, they had moved the outstanding secondary school and much-needed medical clinic to the Vumba region near the Mozambique border. They were serving joyfully and fruitfully in the name of Christ. This remote mission station was about to become the scene of Elim's darkest hour.
Vumba is a mountainous region in the south of the country, near Umtali. The massacre happened at the Emmanuel School in the Vumba, which is 13 miles from Umtali. Africa at that time was experiencing a revolution, and it became almost a civil war between the blacks and the whites, and between the terrorists and the security forces. They started a new school year in September 1977. It was approaching the end of the third term. On the evening of Friday, the 27th, a group of gunmen came in. There were probably 30 of them to 40 of them, and a leader. They then rounded up the missionaries who were on site. There were 9 adults, 6 of them married couples, 3 of them single, and 4 children. The children were young, they were not at school. They were taken out of their home and brought to a part of the site which was surrounded by trees. They were then murdered.
Debbie, thank you for joining us. I believe from reading something that you had written recently, I think it was for our little booklet, that you had a heart for missions very early on in your Christian faith. So when you heard the news of the Vumba massacre, how did it affect you?
Well, that was, as it said in the clipping there, that was in June 1978. And I was a young Christian. I had just started coming to Lisburn Elim at that time. But watching the news on the TV in those days, it was all about Rhodesia, and we were always hearing of different groups of people who were being killed. But I think when it happened to the Elim families, it somehow hit us more, possibly because it was adults and children and a little baby of 3 weeks. And I'm sure I wasn't the only one to go to God and ask why. I think everybody was asking why. So we were just praying for the situation, praying for the families and the friends. And I think Pastor McCandless knew one of them as well. A man called Roy Lynn, who was from here. So I was asking the question why to God, which is fine, and God doesn't mind us asking why, but at the same time, I was looking to him and just asking him to help me to keep on trusting him, that he knew what was happening. Not just here, because we had our own troubles here, but over in Rhodesia. His hand was in it all. He knew what was going on, and he was still in control. And I think that was the main thing that I needed to remember through that time.
Yeah. So you then went on yourself to sign up as a missionary and to join the mission field. So tell us a little bit about where you have served and the kind of roles that you took on when you were there.
Well, to let you know how I got out there to begin with, I met Pius and Evelyn Menembe. Pius was the director from Zimbabwe, and it was in a dinner queue at the Elim Bible College in Capel. So as you do when you're standing in a queue, you start talking to people. So I started talking to Evelyn, and I really didn't know very much about her, but she happened to be the nursing sister of the hospital in Catarere. So when she found out that I was a nurse, she said to me, "Why don't you come out and help?" It was a throwaway statement, and what do you say to that? But at that time, the seed was sown, and 3 years later, in July 1986, I went out to Katarere in Zimbabwe. And Katarere is on the northeast border, bordering Mozambique. It's northeast of Harare. So I arrived to the hospital to work in a 70-bedded hospital, which had adults, men and women, children's wards, a maternity ward, outpatients, antenatal clinics, baby clinics, and we also travelled out to villages to do mother and baby clinics every month. I think we did 13 clinics. It was a very rural place. We were 4 to 5 hours, depending on the roads and depending on the weather, from Harare, and we were 1.5 hours from the nearest government hospital, which was at Nyanga, and that was completely on a dirt road. And the road to Harare was mostly dirt, a dirt road. So that's why it took such a long time. And I started learning Shona. I didn't have any formal language lessons, but I did learn a little bit. I was one of the sisters in charge there. Bobby Marcus was also there at that time, but then Joy Bath joined us. We had one doctor, Evelyn Menembe, who was also a qualified nurse, and then we had another man who came to join us. He was qualified. So the rest of the staff were all unqualified.
And are there any, that's some work, are there any memories in particular that just stand out to you whenever you think back at your time in the mission field?
Well, I was there for 8 years, so I've got so many memories, so I'll not go over all of them. But I know the nurses, they were all local girls, some married, some single, and they were so kind in helping me to fit into the local culture. The majority of them were Christians, and they were so happy to join with us in our early morning devotions with when we were talking to the patients and their relatives. So we all took it in turns to give a word every morning. We were a team, and we became family, really. And as a team, we supported each other. But I have to mention 2 patients who were particularly, remember them particularly. One was a lady who came into us with horrendous head injuries because she had been attacked by men using an axe. So her head was lots of axe wounds in her hands. She wasn't expected to live. And the other was a child who came in after being bitten by a snake on her hand. She was only about 6 or 7. After a few days, her hand became gangrenous, and when the doctor came back from where he had been, he had to amputate her arm so that she would survive. So those 2, the lady and the child, they both survived. But what I remember in particular was when they recovered enough to sit outside, they were singing, and they were singing praises to God. I was really humbled to see that because so much had happened to them. They had so little in their lives, but yet they were singing praises and glory to the Lord. And it just showed me, that even with so little, like we are so blessed, we don't realize how blessed we are. And they had so little, but they were just singing praises to the Lord. I know there's many more stories I could tell, but...
Wow, I'm sure we could listen to them all night.
What about, how did the church at home support you then when you were on the mission field?
Well, as I said, I was there for 8 years, and I know, and my colleagues over there as well knew, we knew that the whole of the Elim family, not just our local churches, were praying for us all the time. We didn't need financial support because we were being paid by the government. But we knew that we needed that prayer, and we knew that we were in God's people's prayers. There was one particular time where there were guerrillas coming across the border from Mozambique, and they were attacking the villagers. And our work with doing the baby clinics involved going to those particular villages. So we had Brian Edwards from headquarters came over to talk to us to see, were we going to stay where we were, or were we going to continue the work we were doing? What were we going to do? And we decided we're in God's hands. This is God's work, and we're going to continue to go out to those villages. So we knew that we asked for prayer, and the people at home were praying for us. And we kept safe through those days. Then more particularly when Joy Bath was diagnosed with HIV and AIDS. Again, that was a time where we were struggling. I know that I was struggling with my why questions again. I'm sure everybody asks why. Like, Joy had been a missionary in India. She'd been in Rhodesia. She went to India, and then she went back to Zimbabwe. But again, we trusted in the Lord, and it turned out that Joy's ministry reached more people after she left Zimbabwe than when she was there, because of the book that was written. And her parents, they ran a B&B, and everybody who went to that B&B, pictures all over the walls of the family, and particularly of Joy. They were handed a book, and the story was given, and they went away with Joy's story. So, but that was the time where we needed prayer. And another time when we made an appeal for clothes for the local people. It wasn't just small bags and parcels of clothes. We had 2 40-foot containers filled to the top, full of clothes and everything. It was absolutely amazing. So that was good. And I received letters from people, not just from this church, but from people from England as well. And they wrote to me regularly, encouraging me all the time. So I was continually being encouraged.
Very good. God's good. Now, obviously, you gave up 8 years of your life here to serve on the mission field. But God has a way of rewarding those who serve him. Tell us a little bit of your story now.
Well, I know what you say when you're saying that I gave up 8 years of my life to go to Zimbabwe. But I don't look at it like that. I didn't have to give up anything really. Because I gained a lot more. And anybody who does anything for the Lord, like even Bob and Ruth were saying, God is no debtor. You just gain so much more. When I went out to Zimbabwe, obviously I was nervous. I was basically feeling very inadequate to the task that lay ahead of me. But the friendship and the support of the nurses, the church leaders, the whole church out there, they were so supportive and welcomed and helped me and everybody to settle in. God promises to be with us no matter where we go. And he was with me there. And when I came home, I must also say that some of the rewards, as you mentioned rewards to me, some of the rewards is not what you get yourself, but is in watching what happens with other people. Like we had Joy and myself, for a time we shared a house, and we had regular Bible studies with the nurses who were living in the compound. And when you see those girls grow in their faith in Jesus Christ, come into a saving faith, it just means everything to you. So I love to look back on those days. Coming home, I got a job back in nursing again, and I loved that. I was given a new home, and I was just so blessed. I have my friends here in the church, and you're all a family. And like the girls were talking earlier about the games that they played that night when we went away. But those young people then are the leaders of the church today. And it's just fantastic to see that. And I just love to see the young people and people growing in the Lord. So you gain new friends. I've gained a home. I've had a job. And I suppose I have to mention.
You might have to mention them.
No, it did take a little while, but I gained a husband. Yes, I spent. I suppose I was 50 when I got married, so I waited a long time for him to come, but he eventually came.
Was he worth the wait?
Oh, definitely worth the wait.
There we go.
So, although I don't have any children of my own, George has plenty. And we have beautiful grandchildren who I look after, and things are going good.
Good. And just before you leave the stage, Debbie, and as we say thank you to you for telling your story, Debbie gave up when she came back from the mission field. She started a new mission field here with the youth, and I'm sure at times we were not an easy bunch, and I apologise on behalf of us all who are here tonight. But
I loved it.
Debbie used to have Tom had us at his house one Sunday night. We went to Debbie's the next Sunday night, and
making pancakes.
Oh goodness, I'm sure we left some mess, but she was so gracious, as was Tom. And Debbie actually led me to faith here in this building, in what would have been a little upper room up here whenever I was 14. And from all of us, from your youth, we just want to say thank you for sowing into our lives whenever you came back. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bless you. Bless you. Thank you.
The 1980s arrived, and with it a new pastoral family to Lisburn Elim. Pastor Jim and Maureen Atkinson, along with their children, Lorraine, Mavis and Pauline. God was faithful, and the congregation had grown. In fact, we had outgrown the building in Wallace Avenue.
We moved to Lisburn in 1980, at the end of 1980, and by 1982, about the middle of 1982, we realised that the building wasn't fit for the purpose that we wanted it to be. We were a growing church at that time, and the activities that we had were not fitting in with the building. I had been visiting Jesse and Tommy Gardner for quite some time because they were unable to come to the church. They were an old couple, and I was told about them when I came. And Jesse always had a keen interest in everything that went on in the church. But she called me one morning and she said she wanted to talk to me. And I went down in the afternoon and I was very surprised. I sat down as usual to have my cup of tea in her china cups, and after we had a cup of tea together, she said to me about moving church. And I said, Jesse, how did you know about this? Has somebody told you about this? Because we only talked about this in a session. And she said, God told me that you were looking for new premises. And I was a bit surprised about that. And she talked to me about, did I have a building in mind, or were we looking at a piece of ground or something like that? And I said, well, there was a building in Lisburn we were interested in, but we hadn't gone to see it or anything. And at that time, she said to me, well, I know about that building. I remember that building being built in Lisburn. And she knew who owned it then. It was a sect called the Church of Christ, an American people that owned the building. Eventually, we talked on about it for a good while, and eventually she said to me, do you think that building would suit you? Would you like that building? And I said, well, it's a very impressive building, actually. When you look at Wallace Avenue and when you look at this place. And she says, I think that would be a great building for you. I says, Jesse, I don't know whether we could afford such a thing as that, because we were a struggling church for money and whatnot at the time. But she says, well, you know, God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. And she says, he can provide. And she says, if you want that building, I want you to do something for me. She says, I'll give you time to get up to Lisburn, and you go down round the back of that building. And when you go round the back, I want you to, at a certain time, I want you to get out of your car and lay hands on the building. And I will pray at the same time down here in Finicky, and we claim that building for God and for the Elim and Lisburn. And I went and I drove down the back of the church, and when I drove down, there was weeds growing everywhere, all over the place. There was no tarmac at that time in the car park, but I parked my car anyway. And when the time came, I got out of my car and I went over and I looked all around me because I was afraid that somebody would see me, what I was doing. And I looked round and they were bowling down in the bowling club, but the hedge was big enough to hide them. And I said, well, here goes. And I walked over and laid my hands in the building. And I just simply prayed, Lord, if this building's for us, will you give us this building for our church? And she prayed the same way. And I came back to the session and we talked about it. And I told them the story of Jesse. And they said, I think we should have a look at this building. And we went to look at the building. I got to know that Melvin Doherty was the solicitor. And he was in Bow Street, I think, at the time. And I went to Melvin Doherty and he talked about the building. He says, do you want to see the building? And I said, yes, we would love to see the building. And eventually we met with one of the men of the church down at the back of the church, and we went in the back door. And the session all went in and we looked at round the hall, and then we went to move upstairs because they wanted to show us the premises upstairs. And a funny thing happened that I didn't know about. Tommy Mateer was the caretaker for us at that time, and Tommy's heart was really in the church. And Tommy waited behind while the rest of us went upstairs. Nobody missed him, really. And Tommy told me after that he done exactly the same as I done. He laid his hands on the wall, the back wall of the hall, and he prayed that God would give us the church as a building for them. For a wee church like us, it was a big, big step, very big step. And we had to go through Pastor Wilson, and Elim was getting us a loan for the thing and all this. And it was a really, really big step for us, a step of faith. But God honoured our faith. I'm sorry, but God honoured our faith, and we took a step of faith, and we borrowed at that time. All Sandy Wilson would let us borrow was 100,000. And I was telling somebody about this the other day, and they laughed. And they wanted to sell us everything, all the pews and everything. And it all came to 110,000. And I remember we said we couldn't afford 110,000. And they said, well, when you can't afford that, come back to us. But we wouldn't do anything else. I met with one of our other pastors, and he was building a church in Belfast at the time in Bearsbridge Road. And Tommy and I met, and he come with his builder to see the pews in the church. And the builder said, how much do they want for these pews? And I said, they want £10,000. And I remember he turned to Tommy McGuckin and he says, Pastor, break their arm. You wouldn't get those for £30,000. They were made of Brazilian mahogany. And on up till a few years back, they were still in Bearsbridge Road Church. So they bought the pews and we bought the building for £100,000. Jessie Gardner was a remarkable woman. She was a very spiritual woman, but she was what some people might have called eccentric in many ways, because she was an awful woman of faith, and she was like that all her life. And she said to me, you trust the Lord and I trust the Lord, and if the church goes with us, we'll get that building. And we did. And Tommy, after she died after that, and she died in the Lagan Valley Hospital, and Tommy said to me one day, I was visiting him down in his own home, and he said, I would love to put something up when you open the church in memory of Jessie. And I says, Tommy, Elim don't put up things like that, really. And we talked about it in the session, and we come to the decision that I should go and try and get somebody to make us something that we could put up on the wall of the entrance hall. And the thing you see in the entrance hall now, the mural, was made by a fellow out of Bearsbridge Road, Elim, who done that sort of craft work. And he designed it and brought it to us. And Tommy was there for the unveiling of that, that was done in her memory of Jessie. I moved to Banbridge a few years after that, or a good few years after that. I moved to Banbridge I was there 11 years and 4 months in Lisburn. And the day that I moved, or 2 days before I moved, Tommy Gardner died. And when Tommy died, I knew that they were going to leave their whole estate to the church in Lisburn to help to pay for the building. And that was Jesse's wish. And Tommy, when he was dying, reminded me about that. And he died in a home beside the Lagan Valley Hospital. The day that I moved to Banbridge, I put my furniture into the house that they had bought for us in Banbridge, and I put my suit on and tie, and I drove back to Lisburn, and I done Tommy's funeral, and that was the last thing that I done in the Lisburn church. And I'll always remember Jessie. She was a great woman of faith. What she did for our fellowship in Lisburn, I will always remember. Amen. God bless you. And happy anniversary.
Pentecostals on the Move were the headline in the Ulster Star in 1984 when we left Wallace Avenue after 60 years and set up home on the Belfast Road under the guidance of Pastor Atkinson. The old Church of Christ building had been purchased for £110,000, and although it needed much work, it looked to be the perfect location for Lisburn Elim to start a new chapter. The main sanctuary where we sit now is in need of much work. However, the minor hall was used to hold services while the refurbishment was carried out by members of the congregation.
So, Nigel, you had the unenviable task of being treasurer of the church at that time. It looked like the perfect building, but it came at a cost. And when we were moving from Wallace Avenue, how were the church finances at that time?
Well, the church finances, we were just about breaking even. Bear in mind, we only had about 60 people, and we had a mortgage to pay, the months. We also had the salary and, electric and other sort of stuff that you normally do, consumables within the church. But God honoured our move at that time. It was a big, big challenge for us to move to the Belfast Road. But the deacons were all of one accord, and we all said, yes, we need to move. We brought it to the church, and the church also agreed that we should go ahead. Now, again, in our first Sunday, we were downstairs, as you heard, and God did really honour, because our very first Sunday, now this was before our official opening, from 60 people, very first Sunday, 126 people turned up in the church, and that was packed downstairs. And you know what? Our offerings doubled in those days. So that made us just to keep going at that time. So God honoured us. And a great catchment area was Dunmurray and Seymour Hill. A lot of people came from there, and we give God the glory for that. So that's what happened there, yeah.
And when you look back at how things came together, there seems to be, just from looking over the research into this night tonight, there seems to be so many wee instances of where things just seem to work out. But of course, we know God's hand is in it all. Can you share a couple of those instances?
Well, there's two that sort of stands out. When we moved down here, there was only one way in on my left-hand side, one way out, and it was a very narrow sort of passageway. But we needed to have a second way out. So later on, we spoke to our neighbour next door, Mr. Wiseman, and he decided that he would sell us part of his garden. And that side, if you could think of coming up the steps there, and there's a wee pathway, that's all we had. And there was a garden next door with vegetables, and we were able to, somebody give us an offering towards that. And the wonderful thing is too that there was people helping us out with that. And there's one person in particular, Sammy Kerr's friend, came here, and we needed help to do the excavating and to start with that road. And there was trees at the bottom and there was trees at the top. And this chap came along with a very large tractor and a tipping trailer. And he said to us that he would, if he took the trees, that it would be free work for the church. And that was phase one. Now, we had a very small car park down there, and there was a retaining wall about 8 foot drop. We knew we had to do something for it because the time we had the bus, we were in and out, and it was very hard to turn. And we purchased, we heard about Woodlands Hotel, and it was across the road. And they said that they would give us the rubble from their building. So we were able to build the car park up from the back, and we started at the back. And what had happened to their WJ Law said that what they would do, they would bring their big haymack, a digger down, and if we would give them the topsoil of our garden down there, that they would give us the free of their big haymack. And I can remember it coming down here, and that was for about a fortnight, and we got that free of charge. So that was a great help for us too in those days.
Music to the ears of the treasurer.
Yes, absolutely.
So you have attended Lisburn Elim since the 1970s. Nigel, how has being a member of this church impacted your life?
Well, greatly. I was saved in 1974, and then the second week, it was the 1st of December 1974, and in the second week of that, I was asked to two places. One was Lisburn Baptist Church, and the other one was Lisburn Elim Church. It was a fellow called Edwin Dury, and I came to the prayer meeting in that time. But not only did it impact my life, but there was two friends of mine got saved, and one was Jimmy Murdoch, and the other one was Billy Fenning. And we did a lot of outreach together for years down the town. So there was a great impact in our life. And I also got into work with Sunshine Corner. And I can remember the big bus that we have, and you'll see pictures of it. We had 80 children on that bus, and I can remember there was Harold Harvey driving it, and it was myself, and Harold would give us cotton wool to put in our ears because the din of the children. You can imagine 80 children or 85 children in a bus, and we had 4 adults down round the bus to keep control, but the noise of that there was unbelievable. I became a deacon just after about a couple of years, and then of course you heard I was a treasurer. Now I didn't want to be a treasurer by any means. I didn't, and I fought for it for about a week. I didn't want to be a treasurer, but after a week I remember going round to Pastor Atkinson's house and saying, look, I will do this. And a great relief, you know. I didn't want to do it, but afterwards, when I said I would do it, it was a sort of a relief, like I've given. God, I'll just do this. And I ended up as a treasurer in Lisburn Elim for 11 years. So I did carry on. So after that there, impact, wow. I was in the music team and was leading the choruses and I was doing various things. But the teaching in this church was great. Right from Pastor McCandless's time to Pastor Atkinson's, Pastor Christie, and our own pastor, Pastor Darren. So, you know, we got great support from the church leadership, and I would give God the glory for what He's done in my life, because, you know, 7 years ago, I had to go in for major surgery, and it was major surgery, and God brought me through that in those days, and it was the prayers of God's people, and I thank God that He brought me through, and here we are today after those years.
Amen. Amen. Another story of God's faithfulness in all situations. Thank you, Nigel.
Okay, thank you.
The new building was proving to be a fantastic resource for the church, and once the work was completed, the congregation almost doubled in size. Very soon, the building was being used 7 days a week to host various meetings and activities, one of which was the campaigners. In 1986, the campaigners decided to take part in the Lisburn Mayor's Parade. A van was borrowed, a float was made, and the kids were dressed up in their campaigners' uniforms. A load of fun was had along the way. The float advertised all the various clubs and meetings that took place in the church and was a great witness as it drove through the route on that day. In fact, it won first prize in its category, which was Peace and Reconciliation.
Several nights a week we were out doing something, but one night was a youth club night, games and things and all, with snooker. Every weekend then, nearly, we're away somewhere. Somewhere.
And where would you have been?
Oh, anywhere and everywhere. Newcastle, all around the area, including weekend over to Salt Island.
Oh, very good.
Ardloon House was a favourite place too. And the main helpers that I got then, I just said, what I need a cook. So that was Trevor Moody and Elizabeth. I remember us going off. Salt Island, there was a boat, took us a fisherman in his boat, took us across with all the belongings and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
Loaded them all off and over to Salt Island.
Very good. And what did you do there?
And with a weekend, Salt Island. With 2 or 3 camps a year.
You used to bring the youth round to your house, didn't you?
16 up here on a Sunday night.
After church?
After church, I had the food in and they done the cooking. I just sat down, put the feet up. You know where it is, away you go. And they'll come in and all the coffee brought in to me, all the food brought in and all the rest of it.
However, on the 27th of February 1987, the congregation were shocked by the news that their beloved church had been broken into and vandalised. A ceiling was pulled down, drawers were rifled, and communion cups were trampled on. Before the culprits removed a fire hose and flooded the church. 2 church minibuses were daubed with obscene and offensive slogans, and the petrol tanks were filled with soft drinks stolen from the youth club's coffee bar. Once more, the congregation came together and the clean-up operation began. Pastor Atkinson stated, "The building is used 7 days a week, and we shall just try to get back to normality as soon as possible. You simply cannot allow a thing like this to affect church life." As soon as the tidy-up was completed, and the premises were usable again, the congregation were busy putting plans in place to fill the seats. October 1988 saw the church host a special week of evangelism for the youth. The special outreach, Life for Youth, ran for a full week and included some well-known gospel groups including Into the Light and Dayspring. The speaker was a Pastor Edwin Michael, who was then a member of the Elim Youth Committee and is now the superintendent of Elim in Ireland. In the Ulster Star, Pastor Atkinson was quoted as saying, "The youth of Lisburn deserve to hear the message of hope and real life that the gospel contains." November of the same year saw a special 2-night event with Pastor James McConnell and the Whitewell Youth Choir.
It's very bright. Joyce and Dave, thank you for joining us up here.
It's a pleasure.
It's a pleasure. Can I just say, in case you have taken great offence, not only did they notice your dashing son, but we noticed his dashing father. Does that make you feel a bit better now? I didn't want you to take great offence.
She's not bad looking.
Yes. Now, tell us a wee bit about your personal journeys of faith.
Well, back in 1988, I realised that I needed to get saved, and I was under conviction without realising it. So I went home and I said to Joyce, "What about going to church?" And she near collapsed. And I said, "What about going to that Elim church down the road?" Because it was nearest. I says, "I've never heard of the Elim church." And I says, "It could be full of weirdos and
you could have been right.
People." But she said, "You'll be all right. You'll fit in very well." So we came. And we did the usual stunt. We sat on the back seat.
Back row, yeah.
Ready for the back door in case there was any of these weirdos. So it went well. Good. And we were approached by semi-normal people. And they were saying nice things and how you doing and whatnot. And so after a few weeks, I said to the pastor, Mr. Atkinson, fantastic fella, I says, "I think I need to get saved. In fact, I know I need to get saved." He says, "I'm going on holiday, but I'll come out to your house on Tuesday. Will you be there?" I says, "Well, okay." So he came out and he had a chat and so forth. And not long after that, I got on my knees in the back room of 20 Leicester Avenue, and I said what I had to say. And to be honest, I was expecting at least an orchestra and the odd angel.
And none? No?
But none of that happened. But I knew inside, that I was saved. And so the next thing I had to do then was to tell people. So
how did that go?
When I went to work, I was in the police. Mm-hmm. And that's full of alpha males and big-headed people and egotistical people. And I had to waltz in and say, "Got saved last night." Well, it was a strange period. But we got through it. And then really for the next 30-odd years, I've tried my best to comply with what the Bible says, which is to love people. Yeah. Because if you haven't got love inside you, you haven't got Christ. Because Christ is love. And to produce fruit. So that's what I've tried to do over the years.
Very good.
I was saved long before Dave, so I brought Lindsay in the church, and Dave never would go to church. He'd never ever really known church. Right. So when he said to me, "Would you like to go?" He went to the one in Finicky Baptist, and then he said to me, "I don't know, the past that one, and I like the sound of the music." So that's why we ended up here. And when we came in that Sunday, we've never left.
Very good. And so my next question was going to be, so you've attended church here since 1988. Mm-hmm. What impact has that had in your lives? Like how has being part of the church helped you in your faith?
My comment to that really is that this, we've discovered, is a Christ-centered church. Yeah. You don't get sermons about wishy-washy subjects. You don't get subjects about green issues. It's Christ and Christ alone. And this is where we get fed. This is where our friends and family attend and always have. And this is where numerous prayers have been sent up on our behalf for all the various difficulties we've had. Like everybody has difficulties, but we've had one or two ourselves. And of course, this is where we've received numerous blessings, which are too many to to outline, you know. And that's what I would say.
Okay. And now that you're grandparents, although Joyce does not look old enough to be a nanny, the most glamorous nanny we know, and obviously your children attend the church, and their children are in the church, and you know, how does that make you feel as grandparents, that your children and your grandchildren are here and living out their faith as well?
When I was a child in England, there wasn't the opportunity to go to Sunday school. Nobody went to church. Nobody talked about church at all. And then when I came over here, before I got saved, and we had children and so forth, Joyce was always faithful in sending our two kids to Sunday school, faithfully. I was indifferent at the time. If you want to go, go, and if you don't, don't. But after I got saved, I realized the importance, and it's wonderful to see them. They go to Sunday school, and then we get the results when we get back home. They sing, they dance, they write, and tell us all about the teachers,
Oh dear.
good or bad.
Don't give any of those trade secrets away.
And it's really, really great to see them and their attitude when they come back. They love it.
Yeah.
And I honestly and truthfully would like to praise all the teachers, because I don't think they get enough praise. They do a fantastic job. And actually, somebody mentioned the book written by Alan Graham, which Joyce bought when the man was here. And I read it, and I had tears in my eyes, actually. The man, at a certain part of his life, was self-centered, didn't treat his wife particularly well, and so forth and so on. He was drunkard and so forth. But the start of the book explained that he went to Sunday school and the seed was planted.
Yeah.
And as the book progressed, that seed matured, and the change and the transformation in him was wonderful. And as most of us know, when your kids are young, it's easy to send them to Sunday school. But when they get to a certain age, perhaps 11, 12, whatever, sometimes they rebel.
Yeah.
But if the seed is planted early, it's always got the potential to flower later on.
That's it.
And that's what's so marvelous about it, you know.
Yeah.
So.
Well, thank you so much for sharing some of your story with us. It's been lovely to hear.
Is that it?
And yeah, that's it.
Can we go?
Yeah, unless you have anything else you want to say. No, we're done. Thank you, Joyce and Dave.
In November 1989, the very well-known Sid Murray and his wife Lily joined the church in Lisburn. Sid was a very gifted evangelist and a welcome addition to the church family. He had worked for years as a builder and was actually one of the contractors involved in the extension in Wallace Avenue in 1970. God always works in mysterious ways. In November 1989, a mission to the family was held in the church with Pastor Roy Kerr as a special speaker. This included special counsel each night for any families in need. In November 1990, a special evening was held to celebrate the 10th anniversary of Pastor and Mrs. Atkinson's ministry in Lisburn. They were presented with a cheque and a cut glass bowl, as it was the style of the day, by Nessie Chapman. They stayed on in Lisburn until 1992, when Pastor Hugh McGann then took over the reins for a period of 9 months.
The 90s arrived, and with it the invention of the World Wide Web. And while my generation were playing on the Nintendo and watching Marty and Doc battle their way back to the future, an agreement was being reached to bring some peace and stability to our wee corner of the world. As ever unhindered by world events, the church continued on with its mission to fulfill the Great Commission. May 1993 saw Pastor Norman Christie and his wife Doreen step through the doors of Lisburn Elim. Pastor Norman had worked for BP for many years before following a call into ministry. They were followed a year later by their son-in-law, Pastor Roy Johnston, and his wife Hilary. Pastor Norman served as a senior pastor and Pastor Roy as associate pastor, having come from a post in Untitled Elim. Once again, church life was busy. A touring production of Heaven's Gate and Hell's Flames came to the church. The congregation were assigned characters and the production was put on to a packed house every evening. Hilary was particularly gifted with writing, and during her time at Lisburn she penned a play titled The Resurrection Reality.
Were you there when they crucified my Lord?
This was a courtroom drama making a case for the legitimacy of the resurrection. Many hours were put into rehearsing, and when the production went on, it was played to a packed audience. These types of productions were a new and very different way to encourage people into church. The message hadn't changed, it was just being presented in a new way.
Arguments. I urge you to listen carefully.
Many will remember Doreen for always being extremely busy and a very gifted organiser. If she came and asked you to do something, you didn't say no. Pastor Christie and Doreen started a new ministry in the church during their period of leadership called the Happiness and Harmony Club. They recognised the people of a certain age were being overlooked in church and were perhaps needing a bit more fun in their lives. Happiness and Harmony was a fortnightly club for those retired members of the congregation, with lunch, visiting speakers and singers, and the occasional outing. It was a huge success and very well intended, and many new names were added to the Lamb's Book of Life because of these Friday afternoons.
I was privileged to be brought up in a very godly home, and I remember from a very early age Mum telling of a story of how she came to know her Lord and Saviour when she was 14 in Belfast, when she went to a mission by George Jeffreys, and later that night she gave her life to the Lord. I say, growing up in a very religious home, my mum and dad used to do open air meetings, preach around different gospel halls. Mum used to love telling her poems. But I know from mum and dad, whenever they find Lisburn Elim, for them, they found their spiritual home. And whenever they were asked to look after and run Happiness and Harmony, for them it was just a true calling. And they loved looking after the older people of the church, looking after their spiritual needs, also looking after their physical needs, because anybody know mum and dad, food always accompanied anything they done. And I know for this church, it was a real blessing for them to help and serve in any way. And one of Mum's greatest poems she loved telling at Happiness and Harmony, her granddaughter and I is going to say,
I'm getting old and shaky, I'm nearly 83. The world seems dull and empty, for nobody cares for me. With none to call me granny, for I have no child, you see. I've worked and scrubbed and mended, as busy as could be. My relatives I have tended, but none remembered me. And although I am in my 80s, I can still hear and see. A lady came to visit, a stranger quite to me. She held my hand so gently and spoke so lovingly. She told me Jesus loves me and that he died for me. No longer am I lonely, however could I be, all because I've trusted Jesus and he's all the world to me.
2006 saw Pastor Roy, Hilary and their children, Cherith, Ben and Annie, moved to Pastors New at Lisburn Elim. At that time, it was decided that another associate pastor should not be appointed, as we were saving for an extension to the building. So for the next few years, Pastor Norman and Doreen carried the baton in Lisburn.
In spring 2009, the doors were closed on the building that had served us well since 1984. It was time for a refurbishment. The plans were outstanding. A purpose-built youth suite, a huge kitchen to cater for all those Christmas dinners, weddings and church functions, a larger minor hall for all our clubs, and of course a larger sanctuary for worship. We moved temporarily into the CWU hall in Lisburn, and it was a squash and a squeeze on that first Sunday. However, the building served us well and was a very kind loan from the people of the CWU. Anticipation was high as we stepped into our new building for the opening service. Not only was the building incredibly modern, but it was now in line with health and safety legislation, which had been an increasing concern with our old building. In 1915, George Jeffreys preached to a large crowd in a gospel tent. 3 banners hung in the front and the sides of the tent that evening. The banner that was at the front and centre carried a simple text found in John chapter 1, verse 29. Behold, the Lamb of God. As we walked into the refurbished building that day, those words were front and centre of our sanctuary, a reminder that the fundamental truth of Jesus was not changed in this congregation. It has been carried like a banner through the last century and declared front and centre of every meeting. It has been our watchword and our mission to point to our beloved Saviour and share the good news of his grace.
Shortly after the dedication of the new building, we received a new pastor into the church. A fresh-faced pastor, Darren McWilliams, and his lovely wife Nicola, complete with baby bump, who had just completed a posting at Banbridge Elim under the guidance of Pastor Stephen Hilliard. Pastor Christie and Pastor McWilliams served together for a year before Pastor and Doreen felt it was time to step back from full-time ministry and enjoy some time together after a very busy 19 years in Lisburn Elim. Under Pastor Darren's leadership, we have seen a number of new ways emerge to try to reach the community around us. We have hosted concerts featuring Nathan Jace and Claire Hamilton. Men's clubs have been held encouraging fellowship, and we have welcomed mums and tats. Pastor has encouraged us to engage with organisations such as the Evangelical Alliance, CAP, Care for the Family, and Care NI, to name a few. Life has changed, and Christianity is now the exception rather than the norm. And he has encouraged us to be aware of how these organisations are working hard to bring the Christian view into the secular arena. 2014 brought the App Shop. Trevor and his team have put everything into this ministry, and it has been a fruitful in more than just monetary ways. They have been able to bless various charities in our local community with sizable donations. They have blessed the church financially and have provided a space for those who need it to call in.
Doesn't seem that long ago. So we have been so blessed in our time here to get to know, I was going to say some of the older faces, but I'll say the ever-present faces. But we've also been really blessed to see lots of new faces coming in. And some of those faces that you'll recognise, Precious and her husband, John Isaac. So we're used to seeing John behind the drum kit, and it's lovely to see Precious on the platform tonight. Precious, can you tell us a bit about how you came to faith?
For as long as I can remember, I've always been around church. I've always been going to church. I grew up in a Christian home, and going to church and being of faith was sort of second nature to me. It was like breathing or walking. I did it without thinking. During my early teens, I sort of fell off a little bit. But thank God, towards my late teens, I was encouraged back into the church, back into faith. And it really started with little things like making sure I go to church every Sunday. And then it became, joining the church team, the workers team, reading my Bible and praying every day. And it just grew from there, and it's still growing. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. So when and how did you find yourself in Lisburn Elim, and what drew you?
In 2019, John and I moved to Lisburn. I attended another church across town, but there was one Sunday morning, I woke up and I had this song in my heart. It's called My Help by Brooklyn Tabernacle Choir. I went onto YouTube that morning and I played the song, and I kept on playing it, like I had it on repeat. And John and I were just singing along. that wasn't enough. I brought out my Bible and went to Psalm 121, which is where the song was taken from. And I just kept on reading the word and reading the word and reading the word. And that morning, our prayer point was based on that passage in the Bible also. So when we got up, we decided to get ready and go to church. So we were going to another church across town, as I mentioned. But while driving, John was like, no, let's go to this other church. So I was like, okay. We literally did a U-turn. And we ended up here. We came here. And that morning, after worship, Pastor Darren sort of left the prayer open to the congregation. And whoever prayed that morning prayed on the passage of Psalm 121. So John and I just sort of looked at each other like, what? And we felt this is the place for us, and we've been here ever since.
It's like, as I said to Nigel earlier, sometimes God knits these little bits together, and they seem like coincidence at the time. You look and you see God's hand in things. Yeah. So you are the lovely mummy of 3 small children. Yeah. How do you find your faith in God and your connection in the church helps you in parenthood?
It's given me clarity. Because it's given me clarity in a way where it's given me clarity in the values that I should uphold and also in the values that I should instill on my children. There's definitely a lot of information out there, and, being a Christian and being of faith certainly helps me weed out the information that I wouldn't want my kids to base their lives on. So it's certainly given me a lot of clarity. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing with us tonight, Precious. Thank you for agreeing to it. Thank you.
Thank you.
The introduction of house groups in 2019 was a different concept for our congregation, but one that has been embraced. Meeting in small groups in each other's homes, sharing the word and a cuppa, has brought us closer as a family and made us more aware of the lives of those we are serving alongside. Through these groups, Pastor has encouraged a spirit of family. He works incredibly hard to keep those unable to attend church for various reasons involved and engaged, visiting them at home, and sometimes even bringing the guitar.
From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home. The coronavirus is the biggest threat this country has faced for decades.
The virus is indiscriminate. It doesn't matter who you are, where you are, or how old you are. All parts of the country are now on an emergency footing.
It's time for the main man now. We're going to grill him. So, it's 23rd of March, 2020. You're sitting at home. Boris has just come on with that announcement. You are now the pastor of a church that cannot meet. What goes through your head?
Well, after seeing that video clip, all right, I feel like I'm in Jurassic Park, with the big doom. Very dangerous thing to ask me what was going through my head. I suppose initially, at that time, panic. Yeah. Really, in all honesty, I was panic. You get the dread, so you do, because I had to go back to that and to lead through that was a very challenging time. And already going into that period of time, I remember, and even journals, looking back over the things. So that's where journaling becomes something that's such a positive thing. I know I was going into that season probably lonelier than I let on, probably more insecure than probably that I appear at times. and just a number of things that I was battling with, and then entering into that, and going through all of everything. I was like, I don't know. I don't even know what I'm doing. I genuinely, I was with Pastor Stephen Hilliard today, so I was, and I was visiting him after him being in hospital. And I said, I was going through a couple of little things that we're going to be talking about tonight, and him and Jennifer, and I said, genuinely looking back, I did not know what I was doing. And we had no rule book, we had no play, there's nothing, you look back with hindsight, so you can learn from things, you can maybe, we've made mistakes, but you know what, we'll learn through it all as well. And I suppose when I do look back, rather than looking back negatively, I look back positively, and I see that God was faithful. Yeah. I see that God was there in the moments whenever, the psalmist said in Psalm 53 and verse 6, he says, what time I am afraid, I will trust in you. And, I just think, I look back and I just see the faithfulness of God. I see, what God did in me, first and foremost, through, there was things that needed to change in me, and through, family. That's one thing I do, Nicola and I, we look back and we just go, there was times that, it was coming back to family first, is what it was. Nobody likes to lead through change, but to be honest with you, change was thrust upon us, no matter what. It was genuine, it was just there, and we had nothing but, just to go with it. And so for me, I suppose, coming off the back of that, we did a series in church called, based on resilience. And I think through that period of time, that's where I learned resilience. Just keep turning up. Yep. Keep doing it. I didn't know what I was doing, but you know what? Keep doing it. And that's where change comes. That's where breakthrough comes. And the people too as well who kept turning up through it all. But seeing that there, going back to that.
No one wants to go back to that. Now, when you came on, obviously we were all sitting at home, we've got our cup of tea or a couple of biscuits, whatever it was. Some of us may or may not have been in our pyjamas. It all looked so polished. It looked like you knew what you were doing, you were in control. So tell us, behind the scenes in those early days, when it looked great on the camera, what was happening in reality?
Arguing behind the scenes, fighting. Really, in all honesty, literally before we were, I can remember the first Sunday, because it sticks out, because you always remember the first, so you do, and how nervous you were. Nicola and I, really, in all honesty, I can't believe we did it at times, too. Clicking live, and then the camera not being the right way round or something, just odd, everything, everything that could go wrong maybe did go wrong. I remember though, I have an eau de toilette, Alison, so I do, Lacoste one that gets used about 3 or 4 times a year, and I use it on special occasions. I used it that morning, so I did. I used it that morning. I never got used the rest of 2020 because it didn't go anywhere. That morning we went live, for the Sunday service, guitar, did the message that we could. Following off the back of my friend Mark being in hospital the day before, and us not knowing whether or not he was actually going to make it, and everything that was going on in our lives at that time, and then the Wednesday night was actually quite funny, and we said we're not doing this again, because the Wednesday night what had happened was Ruben decided he needed to go to the toilet. We thought it would be a good idea, it would look really friendly if we bring the kids in, with the broadcast with us. Ruben needed to go to the toilet halfway through it. He comes back and he wants to flick with the electrical cable in the ground and everything, But thankfully that was cut out, because my mate Mark rang and it cut the broadcast, and people all of a sudden saw Nicola had disappeared and then she'd come back in again. It's now disappeared, thankfully, long gone from memory. But in behind the scenes, the living room was there was always a light set up, there was always a microphone, so there was. You were always trying to make a deadline, for some video that needed, done. But thankfully, looking back, I see people stepped up at challenging times. I look at the Zoom meetings, and I remember the Zoom, the tea and coffees on a Sunday night, whenever we did Zoom. And none of us had ever, unless you were in work, you weren't really using Zoom. You weren't, nothing, you didn't feel confident in front of the screen. Nobody liked, looking at yourself. In fact, you probably looked at yourself more than you looked at the other little tiles. And we were logging in every Sunday night to find out whether Nicola Neville's iron was working, and all the little stories that came as a result of that. And everybody who came on, and had the confidence, just to say, you know what, we're going to come on and touch base with everybody on the Wednesday night, and then through all of that, the Alpha, I had reservations about Alpha really working, and especially over Zoom, but it worked. It really did. So there was a lot of positives, that came from it, and learning new things, doing new things, and genuinely seeing people. What you see sometimes, you see on a Sunday, whilst it's up front, here on a Sunday, and whilst it's seen, it's like the tip of the iceberg of the work that goes on behind the scenes. It's the stuff that nobody sees, too, as well. So what you seen sometimes on the broadcasts, or what you seen, or what you see on Sunday here, it's the tip of the iceberg. There's always a team behind who are just faithful, who just turned up, even though they didn't feel like it, even though they were getting tired and worn out and burnt out and everything, they turned up, and that's what I look back and I see just how God moved there.
One of my things would be to remember how much work went into those worship videos, and how those guys were getting songs and learning them. And, it was like a 3-minute video to us watching at home, but they were getting this song. Paul was setting it up. They had to follow it. They had to record it. And it was a whole new world for them as well. And it to me, that's one of my memories from it.
Putting yourself out there, being vulnerable.
Yeah, that's it. How has the church changed and adjusted to the new normal?
Good question. In all honesty, I believe good. Does it mean that through that time, have we been perfect? No. Have I been perfect? Never. Have we made mistakes? Tons, loads. We've won some, we've lost some, but in terms of the changes that we see, I've loved seeing teams come together. Teams. Part of a lot of stuff, behind the scenes now is being lifted off me, and I've seen guys leading teams stepping up to the plate and watching those teams evolve and develop, and people coming alongside, breathing fresh air into it. So everything in regard to the worship team is I've handed over to Paul. Everything in regard to the media team beforehand was probably just Tim. But now Tim's got a little team there and a little army, working together, too, as well. And the guys, showing people the seats and everything. And I've loved all of that. I've loved seeing all of that, which means, by the way, you speak to them, so you do as well. With all of that responsibility comes all of that. And I have loved that, so I have. I've loved seeing God move, in behind the scenes in people's lives, and the congregation, for their encouragement as well, to each other, and seeing them reaching out to each other and into each other's lives too as well, coming together. It wasn't easy. It looks like we're not out of the woods yet, but I believe and hope and pray that God if we keep Jesus at the middle of it all, if we keep the cross at the center of it all, and we keep the message about Jesus, I believe we can come around that. We can come around that, hope so we can, and seeing God doing what he is doing. So yeah.
I'm going to throw one at you that wasn't on the list.
Thank you.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
This is the kind of thing you would do on us.
Thank you.
So you're welcome. So you've been here 11 years now?
Yeah.
Yep. What would you tell Pastor Darren McWilliams from 11 years ago if you could give him one piece of advice hitting Lisburn Elim 11 years ago? What would you say to him?
In all honesty, enjoy it. I would say, I always remember whenever I came in to ministry, Pastor Bill Crawford, who was my pastor at Bangor Elim, he put his arm around me and he says, Darren, I'm coming to the end of my journey and you're at the start of your journey. And he says, I wish I would go back and do it all again. Not to cover up any mistakes around him, but to enjoy it. And I think that's what I would say. And I would also take ministry seriously, but don't take yourself seriously. And I have to, consciously sometimes, and don't get hung up on the mistakes, because that'll happen. I will always make mistakes. I've now had to just develop. Just don't get hung up. Learn from it, move on, and allow God, remain in that place where God can use you. There was one probably piece of advice. I remember somebody else giving it to another pastor, and then I always vowed that I would say it to another pastor too as well. And that's learn to take a punch. And it stuck with me, so it has. It really has. Nobody talks about that, but literally, you will have to. There's times you just have to roll with it. But in the grand scheme of things, just enjoy it. Just enjoy every minute. Enjoy ministry. Enjoy doing it as unto the Lord first and foremost. And enjoy serving others. Service, I believe, is a privilege. It is a privilege for me to serve Lisburn Elim. It is a privilege for me to see what God... I don't believe that God's finished yet. I don't believe that God's finished with me. I don't believe God's finished with the church. But I believe it's a privilege. And if we keep that as a privilege of what it means to serve, you know, a privilege to serve the King of Kings and to make a difference in the lives of people here in Lisburn Elim, enjoy it. Just enjoy it.
Well, thank you for joining us tonight. And from all of us, I'm sure everyone would agree, we find it a privilege to sit under yourself and Nicola as our leadership team. And we just love to serve you, and we love to just to help out. All of us do. You know, we're one big family here, and you've really brought that atmosphere about. You've really encouraged us to be together and to be the family of God, and we're so thankful for you guys. Thank you.
The pandemic has thrown up many challenges. Many things have changed in day-to-day life, including how we function as a church. Despite social distancing, despite the mask, despite the dreaded Zoom meeting, the church has kept going as it always has. We have been in the building and out of it. We have had to adjust into booking into church to no hugging and no shaking hands. There have been no cups of tea and chats. Despite all these things, the message has remained unchanged. The vision unhindered. We have had to adapt, and we have now new ways of reaching out. We have an online community as well as an in-house congregation. Now, more than ever, the message of hope is needed, and as a congregation, we will continue to take that message to those around us.
Raised to life, our God is able. In His name, we overcome.
As we close tonight, you know, it's the individual stories of salvation and grace that define this church. The lives touched, hearts changed, and futures secured. Lisburn Elim boasts a rich history through those early pioneers, those brave enough to step forward at the very beginning of a movement, not knowing what was to unfold, solely following the calling of the Father, and through those who came after year to serve and to lead.
But we can also boast in the stories of each member of our congregation, saved, healed, baptised, gone on to glory, or sitting with us tonight. Together, these intricate stories of lives well lived for Jesus fuse together to weave a wonderful and a beautiful history.
Each and every part played has been orchestrated by the Father. Each story has been woven by Him, and each person placed strategically by Him in His perfect timing. His grace has carried this church through 10 decades, through changes in society, changes in leadership, and changes in congregation.
It's impossible to tell every story, to show how many times the Father has stepped in His grace and rescued us. But as we close tonight, be assured of your part in this story, your importance in the kingdom, and your part and place in this family. God bless.